This is an audiobook recording by Joaquin Arrieta. Enjoy. El Bajo de los Cuyeos. Everyone has an impulse for returning to certain places to revive their own best memories. We have that strange need to refresh one's mind with things we hope will never change. The lowest area of a large tropical mountain coffee farm is called El Bajo. Dense encino trees surround the red rocky peaks where coyotes would sit and howl at night. The long rocky road and the mud makes one to believe that the distance is greater than what it really is. It is a disrupted welcoming with a post-scenery of a road with no surprises at all, but still a pleasant experience for me whenever I go. The opposite experience, I confess, I have when leaving the place at night. The night comes earlier and gets real dark, and all kind of noises become audible as if it were an insane orchestra play of wild Cuyeos, driving all children lost from roads that never existed to complete darkness and oblivion. It is in complete isolation that my grandfather lived in there. It was more than 1 year since the last time I visited El Bajo. The front of the old wooden house has a huge dead moth hanging in the roof, the biggest I have seen. His old Chevrolet truck facing the narrow road, in a little garden with an old cactus of big leaves where most visitors have written their names on, and some with those whom they were in love with. All of the wooden doors have a crossmark made with blessed palm leaves. There is only an old black and white big television and a crimson sofa in his almost empty and dark living room. There is a narrow kitchen with a big fogon just beside the back door. Next to his house, there are 4 other abandoned wooden cabins that make El Bajo look like a ghost town. 2 of them might have been as large as to host a family, while the other 2 are merely small cabins. In one of the cabins, there used to live an old man with a mental illness. He was a wanderer that just simply found himself lost in that place and made one sleeping compartment his. My grandfather took care of him until the afflicted visitor died. There is a big white old abandoned house farther away from the rest where one of my aunts used to live. She was the first one to get married and to escape from the madness of a domestic violence under the roof of an alcoholic father. She eventually left that house and made her life away. I admire my grandfather's way of living. At first, I felt terrified about thinking how horrible and miserable it would have been to live the way he did. If something happened to him, no one would know. Some of his daughters would have visited him sometimes. As I grew up and became professional, also with my own family, this nostalgic feeling of living alone as he did followed me everywhere. He would claim that we could experience nature as we experience society. Some places are always personed. That is the reason he always refused to abandon his desolate Bajo. Although his problem with alcoholism, which he left soon after the death of my grandmother, he was a very smart man, even during his last years. When younger, he used to be a businessman who didn't merely depend on what he could produce on his farm. He raised a family of 9 children. My grandmother died very young and he never got married again. He condemned his daughters to no education, so all of them got married very young and left him alone. His sons did the same when older. As a matter of fact, the company where I worked as a professional accountant was in a change of administration process. I was in charge of a large amount of money, which I stole and ran away. I still regret this, as I also left my family and became a complete outsider. I was never forgiven by 2 of my daughters, although I was able to send them money to pay for all they needed. I have not seen them since then, probably never after again. The last news I had heard was that my grandfather's health was deteriorating. The last news I had heard was that my grandfather's health was deteriorating. At that time, I was sleeping in a farm one of my uncles bought for me with the money that I had stolen. I was there for 2 long months, hidden from everyone. I was, to the extent it can be humanly possible, sleeping in a dirty and cold chiquero because of fear of being found by either the police or worse, a hitman. I had no communication at all with the world, so with my money in hand, I thought El Bajo a better place to hide and serve some company to him. When I arrived there, he was not that alone. Indeed, a large party of indigenous people were his guests. His empty living room was now full of children and women. By then, they were leaving already. This was a usual event that happened each year before its harvesting season, as indigenous people would come to the neighboring coffee farms to work. He was very nice with them and used to give them food and candies for the children. Once gone, I was warmly received by him and served a coffee we drank with some bread that I brought that date. I wanted to hear about how he was feeling. We took a sweater to put on and went to the corridor to talk, while the dusk came for the infinite time to make El Pico Colorado invisible again. After some good talk, his repressed thoughts came out. The poor old man was unable to sleep sometimes at night. The reason was a strange noise he could hear at night. It was a knock in the walls. It was one single knock, never repeated twice in the same wall. It was a knock going in circles around the house. After a while, there would have been some silence, but the chairs in the living room that were always arranged around a small table would appear in complete nonsense positions in the morning. At first, he thought it was merely hungry coyotes looking for some food. He would always take his old gun that he employed only to make coyotes run away, firing once to the air and following the thing, going in circles around his house as well. He would have also searched under the house to find nothing. Not a single sign of what created the noctambulent noises was possible. He screamed in desperation the last time this event occurred, crying aloud he was a son of God, someone of good, and to be left alone. Those chairs make me feel uncomfortable. I have never seen them before, and I wanted to know more about them. The old man took them out from one of the abandoned houses, as that year the number of indigenous people coming to his house increased. The first night I slept in the living room, and I heard nothing. In the morning, the first task for me was to find a place to hide the money that I had with me. Hide and seek. This is what I used to play with my cousins there, and remember the best spot possible. Under the floor, there was a labyrinth-like structure and a small hole where no one ever would have found me. To my surprise, I found an old rusty machete there. I placed la huaca there and took the machete with me. Machetes in the countryside are thought of objects of some value, so I took with me what someone had forgotten in there. I cleaned and charred it and showed it to him. He would normally have inspected such a tool as, for people from the countryside, a good working tool becomes part of themselves. I felt as I was giving him back something of some meaning to him, something he was missing, but this time he just ignored it and continued serving the breakfast. I kept it with me. Some days after we heard the weird noises he described at night, the old man was not getting nuts, as I thought. I took the machete with me and inspected the place while he did the same with his large and heavy gun. The noises stopped and didn't continue. I left the machete in front of the house next to a big rock, useful for polishing knives. The next day we checked and see that the chairs were not disturbed this time, but to help him feel better, I have the idea of repairing some old rusty hunting traps. that were left in the already dead man Matt's house. This also helped me to have some peace of mind, as there was a large quantity of money with me. We set them up and put them around the house, and another one just in case underneath the floor. 3 weeks passed. Winter was about to come, so we went to the woods, searching for a sign of smoke of a carbonera we started the day before. We collected the last load of charcoal of the year in big sacks and took them one by one out where we left our truck. The rain didn't wait. We took what we could and went back to home, with the red mud in the road making it impossible for the old truck. We waited inside listening to the radio for over an hour until the rain stopped. Then we walked back to home. When we were about to arrive, we noticed some footsteps in the mud. Someone was there before. We inspected the place and found 2 suspicious black trucks. I demanded to him to wait and see. Eventually, after some minutes, they were gone. I inspected near the place where the money was hidden. I hastily crawled under the house and confirmed that the money was still there. We better put a locker in both gates of the road, to prevent wanderers to come across again. For my grandfather, it was not a problem to have visitors, since such an event was so unusual that he actually would have liked the fact that someone would venture that much to visit his farm. Although he lived alone, he loved to receive strangers. The next day, we went back to collect the rest of sacks and to try to make it for the truck. When we returned home, the padlocks were broken and the traps were all disarmed. The money was still there, so I felt released for 100 times from the terrible fear of losing the money that had made possible my haste to run away from society. What motivated my grandfather the most to take his gun in complete insanity was the fact that the weird chairs were missing. I walked next to him to find out who was there disturbing the place of the poor old man. The machete was gone as well. Whoever was there, we knew was now armed. It was getting dark as usual. When we took sight of the aunt's abandoned house in the distance from one of the small windows, we could see the door was open. He was so nervous that he couldn't keep his gun steady. I went to inspect, and when I looked behind me, I noticed he was gone. An old lady was there in front of me instead. She greeted me from afar. Before any explanation, I heard a shot from my grandfather's gun. I ran to see what was going on and found nothing but his gun covered with red mud behind a deformed trunk of a dead encino tree. The old lady was my aunt, who came to visit the place. She was so astonished and so ill to look at me. There's no explanation to what happened to me there. It seems I was for 2 weeks alone. There was no one in there, no one but me. Me and the missing machete, the gun, the Chevrolet, the chairs, the muff, the cactus, the old TV, and the money. According to her, 1 month before, she had found a cadaverous hand in complete oblivion. His body was pierced with a machete.